Welcome to the Learning Center's online tutorial on preparing for the GMAT. This presentation is designed to give an overview of how to register for the GMAT and a breakdown of the various sections encountered on the test. So, what is the GMAT? The GMAT is the standard business school entrance exam, consisting of 4 timed sections measuring your ability to reason verbally, quantitatively, and in writing. The test is administered year-round and on demand, so finding a time to take the test shouldn't be a problem. The test fee is usually around $250, and there's a $50 fee to reschedule. Once you arrive at the testing center, you'll be required to present some form of identification. Below is the overall exam format. It is broken down into 5 different sections with varying time limits and question types. We will go more in depth about each of these sections later in this presentation. You can also expect the test to take around 3.5 hours with optional 8-minute breaks after integrated reasoning and quantitative sections. So what can you expect on test day? Well, like most testing centers, it is also important for you to remember to bring your proper identification, the names of the programs you would like your scores sent to, and your appointment confirmation letter or email. You will be provided with noteboards, laminated scratch paper, similar to a dry erase board, at the testing center. It is also important to note that you should dress for a range of temperatures in the testing room. Finally, storage space at testing centers can be limited, so make sure you only bring what you need. Unlike other tests, the GMAT has a palm vein reader biometric identification. You will be required to have your palm scanned to record your unique vein pattern. This is a security measure to ensure that you are not taking the test for someone else. The GMAT is administered via a computer adaptive test. The test starts with a question of medium difficulty and adjusts to your individual ability level. As you answer each question, the computer scores your answer and uses it, as well as responses to preceding questions, to determine which question to present next. Correct responses typically prompt questions of increased difficulty, while incorrect responses generally result in questions of lesser difficulty. There's usually only one question presented at a time, and you may not skip, return to, or change your response to previous questions. It is important to keep in mind that there is a severe penalty for not completing exam sections. The time and number of questions that remain in the section are displayed on the screen during the exam. On average, you have about 1 minute and 45 seconds for each verbal question and about 2 minutes for each quantitative question. You'll be scored on a section as long as you complete some work in the section. The UNT Graduate Programs Office recommends that students sit for the GMAT exam no later than 1 month prior to the application deadline. This is to ensure timely reporting of scores. To schedule a time to take the GMAT, visit www.mba.com for details. The UNT school code for the GMAT is as follows: 6DP-8M-55. The GMAT is scored based on several criteria. The first is the number of questions you answer, followed by whether you answer the question correctly or incorrectly, and then the level of difficulty and other statistical characteristics of each question, such as is the question weighted or not. It's important to note that every test contains trial questions. These are not scored, not identified, and they appear in various locations within the test. The total score is a scaled combination of verbal and quantitative scores, known as the Big Score. The Analytical Writing and Integrated Reasoning sections are separate scores. The range for most scores is around 200 to 800, and 2/3 of test takers score between 400 and 600, with only 10% scoring over 700. So, what score do you need on the GMAT? The answer is, it depends. Some schools have a minimum and others do not. Here at UNT, generally speaking, the average GMAT score is between 520 and 550 of students who were accepted into the business program. However, it's important to note that other factors weigh into this decision, and you may, for example, get a 560 on your GMAT and not be admitted. In the analytical writing portion of the GMAT, you will have 30 minutes to write an essay based on the analysis of an argument. This essay will be scored on a scale from 0 to 6. It's designed to measure your ability to think critically and communicate your ideas, analyze the reasoning behind a given argument, and write a critique of that argument. This essay concerns topics of general interest related to business or a variety of other subjects, but it is important to note that specific knowledge is not necessary. Below, you will find an example of a prompt that you could encounter on the GMAT. Take a couple minutes, read the prompt, think about it, then discuss how well-reasoned you find this argument, and in your discussion, be sure to analyze the line of reasoning and use of evidence in the argument. For example, you may need to consider what questionable assumptions underlie the thinking and what alternative explanations or counterexamples might weaken the conclusion. You can also discuss what sort of evidence would strengthen or refute the argument, what changes in the argument would make it more logically sound, and what, if anything, would help you better evaluate its conclusion. Make sure during this section that you have a clear plan, manage your time effectively, and take some time to outline your thoughts before writing. Also, it might be a good idea to leave a few minutes at the end to review and edit what you have written. The best way to prepare for this section is to practice writing essays. You can access all of the writing prompts used on the test through the GMAT website. Pick one and write a practice essay in the conditions as similar to test day as possible. Then, ask someone to review it for you to look for mistakes. You can also ask professors or current graduate students if they could look over your essay and provide feedback. The integrated reasoning portion of the GMAT is a 30-minute section that consists of 12 questions. It is scored on a scale of 1 to 8 and is designed to measure your ability to synthesize information presented in graphics, text, and numbers, evaluate relevant information from different sources, organize information to see relationships and solve multiple interrelated problems, and combine and manipulate information to solve complex problems that depend on information from one or more sources. It is important to note that almost all of these sections require multiple answers. These questions are designed to measure how well you integrate data and to solve complex problems. There is no partial credit given for any question. All of your answer choices for a single problem are presented on the same screen, and you must submit all answer choices before moving on to a new question. It is important to note that once you answer a question, you may not go back to it. Data presented in text are approximately 300 words or less. Answer options don't provide information or clues that will help you solve other questions. On the next slide, you will see an example of a graphic interpretation. Interpret the graph or graphical image and select the option from the drop-down list to make the answer or statements accurate. On this slide, you can see an example of questions based off of a graphic interpretation. The instructions say, refer to the pictograph of a survey of students at Central Community College. Each symbol represents 10 students in a sample of 300. Use the drop-down menus to complete each statement according to the information presented in the diagram. The first question says, if one student is selected at random out of the 300 surveyed, the chance that that student will be under 30 or a high school graduate, or both is. So the key here is that the first question uses the word or. So think of something like people with red or blonde hair. This is all the people with red hair plus all the people with blonde hair. So here you have anybody who is under 30 or a high school graduate or both. So you have to count everyone who has at least one of these attributes. That is everyone in the entire diagram except the football-shaped middle region. Since the football region is 5 hourglasses, each hourglass equaling 10 students, we have a total of 50 students that we are not counting. So we can subtract that 50 and we're looking at 250 students out of the 300. So the probability is 5 out of 6. The second question reads, if one student is selected at random from the 300 surveyed, the chance that that student will be both under 30 and a high school graduate is. For the second question, the key word is and. So we will only count the hourglasses that are both under 30 and a graduate. which is the single line of hourglasses at the top. This is 10, which each represents 10, so 100. And since it's 100 out of 300, the probability is 1 out of 3. On the next slide, you will see an example of a two-part analysis. Select one answer choice from each column to solve a problem with a two-part solution. Possible answers will be presented in a table with a column for each part. The quasi-JX's fuel economy is E kilometers per hour, when its driving speed is constant at S kilometers per hour. In terms of the variables S and E, select the expression that represents the number of liters of fuel used in 1 hour of driving under ideal driving conditions at a constant speed of S. So, for fuel economy, you have E divided by L, and for driving speed, you have S divided by the number of hours, which means the distance traveled is just S, since it's an hour of travel. So, we want to determine the number of liters. So it would be the distance traveled divided by the fuel economy, or E, as each E represents 1 liter. That would make the answer S divided by E. In the right-hand column, select the expression that represents the number of liters of fuel used in a 60-kilometer drive under ideal driving conditions at a constant speed of S. So we want to determine the number of liters. So it would still be the distance traveled divided by the fuel economy. However, distance is now 60 kilometers and fuel economy per liter is still E. So it's 60 divided by E. On the next slide, you will see an example of a table analysis. Sort the table to organize the data so you can determine whether certain conditions are met. Each question will have statements with opposing answers, like yes or no, true or false, inferable or not inferable. Select one answer for each statement. On this slide, we can see an example of questions based on table analysis. The directions read, for each of the following statements, select yes if the statement can be shown to be true based on the information in the table. Otherwise, select no. The first statement reads, no individual country produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar. To answer this question, we must examine the bottom line of the table labeled sugar. It appears that Brazil is the #1 producer of sugar in the world, but they only produce 20% of the world's total production. So it is not possible for an individual country to produce 1/4 or 25% of the world's sugar. This makes the statement true. The second statement reads, if Brazil produces less than 20% of the world's supply of any commodity listed in the table, Brazil is not the world's top exporter of that commodity. To solve this problem, look at the second column titled Production World Share. In this column, we can see that Brazil produces less than 20% of the world supply for beef, chickens, corn, cotton, and pork. Yet despite producing less than 20% in these areas, the column on the far right informs us that Brazil is the top exporter for beef and chickens, but does not produce 20% of the world's supply. This makes this statement false. The final statement reads, of the commodities in the table for which Brazil ranks first in the world exports, Brazil produces more than 20% of the world's supply. This statement is sort of the reverse of the previous statement. If we examine the exports world rank column on the far right, we can see that Brazil is #1 in exporting beef, chickens, coffee, orange juice, and sugar. Yet, of these exports, Brazil only produces 16% of the world's supply of beef and 15% of the world's supply of chickens, which makes the statement false. Finally, the next slide is an example of multi-source reasoning. Click on the page to reveal different data and discern which data you need to answer the question. One set of data is used for several multi-source reasoning questions, but the questions are independent of one another. You don't have to answer one question correctly to be able to answer another. Over the next couple slides, you will see 3 emails from an administrator to their research staff. After carefully reading each email, determine whether the information in the email supports one of the inference statements on the right. Email number 1 Email number 2 is a response from the project coordinator to the administrator. It reads, although we got exactly 350 actual survey completions, we need at least 700, and we're hoping for even more. So we plan to invite a second group to participate. Both the results from the first group and the other research indicates that this type of survey and these type of participants, there's about a 40% probability that any given invitee will submit the completed survey in the time we allow. Obviously, that doesn't mean that if we invited 1,000 people, we'd necessarily get at least 400. So we need to think in terms of the risks of getting too few returns or exceeding the budget. All of the participants who submitted their surveys by the deadline will get the $50 payment we promised. What is our total budget for compensation to participants? We know the answer for this is not inference 1, as we've already used that answer. Inference number 2 works with this email because it's a response from the project coordinator, and inference number 2 is the only answer that mentions this position. For this question, the answer is the second inference. The quantitative section of the GMAT is 75 minutes and consists of 37 questions. It is focused on data sufficiency and problem solving, and is scored on a scale of 0 to 60s. The required knowledge for this section is arithmetic, elementary algebra, and commonly known concepts of geometry. On the following slide, you will see an example of problem solving. This type of question measures your ability to reason quantitatively, solve quantitative problems, and interpret graphic data, understand problems involving arithmetic, elementary algebra, and common geometry concepts. And finally, it is also an evaluation of the amount of information needed to solve a quantitative problem. Below is an example of problem solving. This question states, if U is greater than T, R is greater than Q, S is greater than T, and T is greater than R, which of the following statements must be true? Option 1 is U is greater than S. Option 2, S is greater than Q. And option 3, U is greater than R. In order to answer this question, we must first organize these letters by increasing value based on the information we have been given. If you look at the red letters on the bottom right, we have done just that. If we examine our first option, U is greater than S, we find the statement not to be true, as we do not know the exact relationship between the letter S and the letter U. We know that U is greater than T and S is greater than T, but there is no information on the relationship between U and S. Option 2 is correct as S is greater than Q, and option 3 is correct as U is greater than R. This means that options 2 and 3 are true. Therefore, the answer is E. The following slide contains an example of data sufficiency. These questions measure your ability to analyze a quantitative problem, recognize which information is relevant, and determine at what point there is sufficient information to solve a problem. Usually these questions are accompanied by some initial information and two statements labeled as 1 and 2. You must decide whether the statements given offer enough data to enable you to answer the question. The verbal reasoning section of the GMAT is 75 minutes long with 41 questions, and it is scored on a scale of 0 to 60. It measures your ability to read and comprehend written material, reason and evaluate arguments, and correct written material to conform to standard written English. Reading comprehension passages are up to 350 words long. Their topics contain material from the social sciences, physical or biological sciences, and business-related areas such as marketing, economics, and human resource management. Because the reading comprehension section of the GMAT exam includes passages from several different content areas, you may be generally familiar with some of the material, but it is not required that you have specific content knowledge. All questions are to be answered on the basis of what is stated or implied in the reading material. Reading comprehension passages are accompanied by interpretive, applied, and inferential questions. Reading comprehension questions evaluate the following abilities: understanding words and statements in reading passages, understanding the logical relationship between significant points and concepts in the reading passages, drawing inferences from facts and statements in the reading passages, and understanding and following the development of quantitative concepts as they are presented in a verbal manner. Below is an example of reading comprehension. Take a couple of minutes to read the following passages and answer the question below. In this instance, the answer is A, because it is the only answer that addresses the topic of each paragraph, which evaluates U.S. history textbooks and the biases that they contain. Critical reasoning questions are designed to test the reasoning skills involved in making arguments, evaluating arguments, and formulating or evaluating a plan of action. These questions are based on materials from a variety of sources, but no familiarity with specific subject matter is needed. These questions measure your ability to reason effectively in three main areas. The first is argument construction. Can you recognize the basic structure of an argument, properly drawn conclusions, underlying assumptions, and well-supported explanatory hypotheses or parallels between similar arguments? The second is argument evaluation. Analyze a given argument, recognize factors that would strengthen or weaken an argument, reasoning errors committed in making an argument, or aspects of the methods by which an argument proceeds. The final is formulating and evaluating a plan of action. They may ask you to recognize the relative appropriateness, effectiveness, or efficiency of different plans of action, factors that would strengthen or weaken a proposed plan of action, or assumptions underlying a proposed plan of action. Below is an example of the critical reasoning portion of the exam. The question reads, the cost of producing radios in country Q is 10% less than the cost of producing radios in country Y. Even after transportation and tariff charges are added, it is still cheaper for a company to import radios from country Q to country Y than produce radios in country Y. Here the correct answer is C. If the cost difference between production in the two countries is 10% and the tariff is less than 10% of the total production cost, it is in fact cheaper to make the radios in country Q and import them. Sentence correction questions ask you which of the 5 choices best express an idea or relationship. The questions will require you to be familiar with stylistic conventions and grammatical rules of standard written English. You must also demonstrate your ability to improve incorrect or ineffective expressions. These questions measure 2 broad aspects of language proficiency. The first is correct expression. This means grammatically and structurally sound, as well as does it conform to standard rules of written English. The second is effective expression. Do the ideas express a relationship concisely and clearly? Is there no superfluous words or needless complicated expressions in the best choice? Does it use proper diction, the standard dictionary meaning of words, and the appropriateness of words in context? You must be able to recognize whether the words are well chosen, accurate, and suitable for the context. Take a moment to read the following passage, paying particular attention to the underlined portion of the paragraph. In order to answer the question correctly, we must first determine if we are using the word cost or costs. In this case, we will use the plural form costs, as there are going to be various types of expenses that arise from upgrading data processing equipment instead of one singular cost. The next step is to determine if associated with, costs of, or arising from is the best option. Here, associated with works best because it is the most specific way to identify that these costs belong to the upgrading data processing equipment. This makes the answer B. You have two main resources in preparing for the GMAT. The first is the GMAT website. This website contains a list of writing prompts, free software downloads, and some sample questions for each type of question. The second, for UNT students, is the Academic Resource Library here in the Learning Center. Here we have current test prep books available to use for free. As you prepare for the GMAT, it might be a good idea to work on the following: reviewing basic math skills, work on your logic and analysis skills, review the standard rules of written English, take practice tests to work on your pacing, spend your preparation time focusing on areas that you are the weakest, and creating a study strategy around your ability to answer increasingly difficult questions. When taking the test, there are a few strategies that might help you be successful. The first is, use your allotted time wisely. There will be a clock displayed on each section so you can track your time. The clock will turn yellow when you have 5 minutes remaining. The next is, read all test directions carefully. They will explain exactly what is required to answer each type of question. Next, read each question carefully and thoroughly. Determine what is being asked, eliminate wrong answers, and select the best choice. Never skim, as it may cause you to miss some important information. Next is, don't waste time trying to determine the difficulty level of each question. Keep moving through the test and try to finish each section. Confirm your answer only when you are certain that you want to move on to the next question. Random guessing can significantly lower your scores, so if you don't know the answer to a question, you should try to eliminate as many answer choices as possible and then select the answer you think is best. Another important factor to consider as part of your preparation is the amount of time you study. Below you will see a chart from the Graduate Management Admission Council tracking the hours spent preparing for the GMAT and the average number of study hours by GMAT score. You can see a positive trend from the chart on the right that the more time you dedicate to thoughtful study for the GMAT, the more likely you are to receive a higher score. A question that often arises when taking standardized tests is, if I'm running out of time, should I skip or guess? Based on an analysis of thousands of actual GMAT records, it depends, and it's also a complicated algorithm. If you only have 1 or 2 items left in either section, it doesn't make much difference randomly guessing or leaving blank. If you're in the verbal section, if you have up to 5 questions left, it doesn't make a difference. If you're in the quantitative section, odds improve if you randomly guess and complete all questions. But to sum it up, guess when you can eliminate 1 or more answers, don't sweat unanswered questions on verbal, but give an answer to everything on quantitative, even if this entails blind guessing. On the day of the exam, before you begin, you may select up to 5 programs to receive your official score report. You will receive an unofficial score report with verbal, quantitative, integrative reasoning, and total scores immediately after your exam. You will receive an email with a URL to access your score report within 20 days. You can view, download, and print from there. You should know that your scores will be valid for 5 years. As mentioned on the previous slide, at the completion of the exam, you will be able to view your unofficial scores immediately. At that time, you will have the option to cancel your scores. It is important to know your target score that you're aiming for and that you can retake the test in 16 days. Though it is not generally recommended to retake the test, that option is available for you. Canceled scores can also be reinstated within 60 days of the test date. If you are not happy with your score and think you can improve, it may be worthwhile to retest. You must wait at least 31 days after you take the exam. You may not take the exam more than 5 times in a 12-month period. If you achieve a perfect score of 800, you must wait at least 5 years before testing again.